If you stand on a busy downtown sidewalk in Chicago and listen carefully, beneath the rumble of the L, beneath the honking taxis, beneath the steady thrum of 21st century ambition, you might imagine you hear something else, the echo of footsteps from another city, one that never truly disappeared. Because under Chicago, beneath the steel and glass and concrete, lies a secret 19th-century metropolis, buried, bricked over, and astonishingly intact. It is not a myth, it is not a legend, it is a city beneath a city. In the middle of the 1800s, Chicago was young, muddy, and wildly ambitious. Incorporated in 1837, it rose almost overnight from marshland along the southwestern shore of Lake Michigan into a booming commercial hub. Railroads converged there. Grain from the Midwest poured in. Lumber floated down from Wisconsin. Immigrants from Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe flooded into its streets, bringing labor, language, and hunger for opportunity. But Chicago had a problem. It was built on swamp. The land was flat, so flat that rainwater had nowhere to go. Streets turned into seas of mud. Wooden sidewalks floated away. Rotting animal waste from stockyards mixed with human sewage in open gutters. Cholera and typhoid swept through neighborhoods with terrifying regularity. In summer, the stench could be overwhelming. Visitors wrote that the city seemed to sink and ooze under its own filth. Engineers proposed an audacious solution. If the city was too low, they would raise it. Not metaphorically, literally. Beginning in the mid-1800s, Chicago undertook one of the most astonishing engineering feats in American history. Entire city blocks, brick buildings, hotels, shops, even massive multi-story structures were lifted several feet into the air using thousands of jack screws operated by teams of laborers turning them in unison. Imagine standing inside a hotel lobby as dozens of workers below slowly crank iron screws. The walls creak, the floor shudders, chandeliers tremble. Outside, the street level inches upward, or rather, you rise above it. Patrons continue drinking coffee while the entire building ascends around them. This was not fantasy, it happened. In 1858, a four-story brick hotel weighing thousands of tons was raised nearly 6 feet while still in operation. Guests reportedly never checked out. They simply climbed slightly taller steps each day as masons built new foundations beneath them. Block by block, street by street, Chicago lifted itself out of the mud. New sewer systems were installed beneath the elevated streets. Sidewalks were rebuilt at higher grades. Store entrances were adjusted. Stairs appeared where none had existed before. What had once been ground floors became basements. And then something strange occurred. The old city did not disappear. It remained below. What we now call Chicago's underground began as a practical byproduct of urban elevation. The former street level, once muddy and chaotic, was entombed beneath brick vaults and stone arches. Storefront windows that had once faced the street now opened into darkness. Sidewalks became ceilings. The result was a hidden labyrinth, miles of corridors, chambers, and passageways that preserved a fossilized version of mid-19th century Chicago. But fate had another trial waiting. On October 8, 1871, a small fire began in a barn on the city's southwest side. By the next evening, much of Chicago was in ashes. The blaze, now known as the Great Chicago Fire, raged for more than 30 hours, killing hundreds and leaving over 100,000 people homeless.
Wooden buildings fueled the inferno. High winds hurled embers across rooftops. Entire neighborhoods vanished in orange flame. When it was over, more than 3 square miles of the city lay destroyed. And yet, in a grim twist of irony, some portions of the buried lower levels survived. The fire consumed what stood above ground, but beneath the elevated streets, behind thick masonry walls, parts of the older Chicago endured, sealed, dark, and largely forgotten. Rebuilding began almost immediately. Determined never to suffer such devastation again, Chicago rebuilt in brick, iron, and eventually steel. Architects experimented with fireproof construction. Engineers pioneered techniques that would lead to the modern skyscraper. In 1885, the home insurance building rose 10 stories high, widely considered the world's first skyscraper. Chicago became a proving ground for vertical ambition. But as the skyline climbed upward, the city below sank further into obscurity. Merchants occasionally used basement vaults for storage. Freight tunnels were carved later to move coal and goods beneath traffic-clogged streets. During Prohibition, whispers circulated that speakeasies and bootleggers exploited underground routes to evade law enforcement. Some tales were exaggerated, others were not. In the early 20th century, Chicago constructed an extensive freight tunnel network beneath downtown streets, narrow-gauge rail lines running in cramped corridors below the surface. Small electric locomotives hauled coal to buildings and removed ash, unseen by pedestrians above. These tunnels connected basements, creating a secondary city grid invisible from street level. Then, in 1992, something extraordinary happened. Construction crews working on bridge repairs near the Chicago River accidentally drove a piling into the wall separating the river from one of the old freight tunnels. At first, it was just a small leak. Workers tried to patch it, but the river does not negotiate. Water began pouring into the tunnel system. Within hours, millions of gallons flooded the underground network. Basements filled, electrical systems shorted. The heart of downtown was evacuated. Merchandise floated. Office workers watched helplessly as water surged upward through forgotten passageways. The incident became known as the Chicago Flood of 1992. For many residents, it was the first realization that an entire subterranean infrastructure lay beneath their feet, aging, interconnected, and vulnerable. Reporters descended into the damp tunnels after the water was pumped out. What they found astonished them. Brick-lined corridors stretching for miles, sealed doorways leading to spaces that predated the fire. Remnants of 19th-century craftsmanship hidden in darkness. Some sections revealed arched ceilings that had once been sidewalks. Iron shutters marked former storefronts. Cobblestones remained where horses once trod. It was as though time had folded. Urban explorers, careful, cautious, sometimes reckless, became fascinated. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they documented fragments of the buried city. They found old glass bottles, rusted signage, forgotten staircases descending into voids. In certain basements, you can still see windows that no longer look outside, but instead open into brick walls, sealed evidence of the street that once existed at that level. The transformation of Chicago in the 19th century was so dramatic that modern pedestrians rarely grasp it. Imagine lowering today's downtown by 12 feet and entombing everything at that level. That is, in essence, what happened in reverse. Why was such an enormous undertaking even possible? Part of the answer lies in the geology of northeastern Illinois. The soil beneath Chicago consists largely of clay, firm enough to support structures when properly managed, yet soft enough to allow incremental lifting without catastrophic collapse. Engineers exploited this balance. The project required coordination on an unprecedented scale. Property owners had to agree on new grades, streets had to align, sewer lines had to connect seamlessly. All of it occurred in a city still rapidly expanding. It was urban surgery performed while the patient sprinted. What makes the buried city so compelling is not merely its existence, but its symbolism. Chicago has always been a city of reinvention. It reversed the flow of its river in 1900, an engineering marvel designed to protect drinking water from pollution. It built upward after fire destroyed it. It hosted the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, dazzling millions with electric lights and neoclassical grandeur. It became a rail capital, a meatpacking titan, a jazz epicenter, an architectural laboratory. Each era layered itself atop the last. Yet, physically, those layers remain.
Beneath certain downtown buildings, particularly in older districts, structural columns extend downward into spaces that were once open air. Some underground corridors still display the curvature of original sidewalks. In rare cases, old street signs have been discovered embedded in masonry. There are stories, carefully verified by historians, of construction crews breaking through walls during renovations and finding intact 19th-century facades hidden behind them. One engineer described entering a sealed chamber and shining his light across what looked like a storefront frozen in time. Stone lintels, decorative brickwork, a threshold leading nowhere. It felt less like demolition and more like archaeology. Unlike ancient Rome or Istanbul, Chicago's buried layers are not centuries old. They're only about 150 years removed from us. The people who walked those lower streets were not distant emperors or medieval merchants. They were butchers, newspapermen, immigrants saving wages for brick homes, children running errands. Their city still exists, only shifted vertically. There's a haunting quality to that thought. Stand at an intersection in the Loop at rush hour. Thousands stream past in tailored coats, earbuds in, eyes forward. Beneath them, in darkness, lies another intersection, bricked up, silent, inaccessible. The old cobblestones will never again feel sunlight. The storefront windows will never again display hats or dry goods. The mud that once plagued the city has long since dried. Yet the physical memory remains. Historians sometimes argue that American cities lack the layered antiquity of European capitals. Chicago challenges that assumption. Its antiquity is not spread across millennia, but compressed into vertical strata. The buried city also reshapes how we think about progress. When Chicago raised its streets, it did so out of necessity. Disease and flooding demanded innovation. But that decision inadvertently preserved a snapshot of urban life. In most cities, old streets are demolished, replaced, erased. In Chicago, they were entombed. And there they remain, quiet witnesses to ambition. Today, official tours in certain districts allow visitors to glimpse fragments of these lower levels. Guides explain how doorways became windows and windows became walls. They point out the faint line on building exteriors, marking the original street height. Tourists gasp when they realize that the basement they are standing in was once the main entrance. For American audiences, the buried city resonates deeply because it embodies core national themes: ingenuity, resilience, reinvention. It also humbles us. We often imagine modern infrastructure as permanent. Skyscrapers feel immovable, roads feel fixed. But Chicago proves that even entire cities can be lifted, altered, and layered within a single lifetime. Some urban planners study 19th-century Chicago as a case study in adaptive engineering. How do you redesign a metropolis without abandoning it? How do you install sewers beneath structures that already exist? How do you coordinate thousands of private owners toward a unified elevation plan? The answers require daring and a tolerance for risk that would seem unimaginable today. Workers operated massive lifting systems without modern hydraulics. Surveyors calculated grades without digital modeling. Yet the operation succeeded, and in succeeding, it left behind a hidden world. Occasionally, during deep excavations for new high-rises, construction crews encounter relics from that buried era, fragments of pottery, horse tack, iron hardware. Archaeologists document these finds carefully before development proceeds. Each artifact reinforces the reality that Chicago's first modern self still lies below. There's a poetry in the idea that a city known for reaching towards the sky also contains a secret city beneath its feet. One stretches upward in glass and steel, the other rests in brick and shadow. Together, they form a single narrative, a metropolis that refused to surrender to mud, fire, or flood. And perhaps that is the most astonishing aspect of all. The buried city is not merely an engineering curiosity. It is evidence of a moment when human willpower reshaped geography, when a young, chaotic settlement decided it would not accept disease and decay as destiny. So it rose, literally. And in rising, it preserved its former self in darkness, waiting for future generations to rediscover it. If you walk through downtown Chicago tonight and glance at the towering skyline reflecting off the lake, remember this. Somewhere below the taxis and trains, beneath the neon and noise, there are silent brick corridors that once echoed with the voices of 1850. A metropolis below a metropolis. Not lost, just buried.